So as I mentioned, this conference is made possible through a grant from the Department of Education. We're particularly honored here today to have Mr. Mohamed Abdel-Kader here. Mohamed Abdel-Kader is the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of International and Foreign Language Education, IFL, at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Post-Secondary Education. As Deputy Assistant Secretary of IFL, Mr. Abdel-Kader has responsibility for encouraging and promoting the study of foreign languages and the study of cultures of other countries at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary levels in the United States. He coordinates the related international and foreign language education programs of other federal agencies as established in the 2008 Higher Education Opportunity Act. He leads the work of IFL in administering the domestic programs authorized under the Title VI, which covers us, of the Higher Education Act, and those overseas programs under the Mutual Education and Cultural Exchange, the Fulbright-Hays Act of that the Education Department administers. Mr. Abdel-Kader is fluent in Arabic and speaks basic Spanish. He holds a bachelor's degree from Clemson University, a master's degree in higher education from Vanderbilt University, and an MBA from Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business. So I will call him to inaugurate the day's events. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Abdel-Kader.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you not holding my Georgetown degree or my Clemson degree against me. I've had a rough time in your football stadium a few times coming up to watch my Tigers play, but generally I was usually pretty happy with the results. But thank you again, Professor Prasad. Yeah, and I was really bummed that you guys left the ACC, I have to be honest, but got to do what you got to do, I suppose. Well, thank you again for that kind introduction, Professor Prasad. I just want to say thank you to all the sponsors and the folks who helped make this happen. These types of events are really important for our students to come out and engage in and discuss these sort of new and emerging issues. I remember as a student, these types of events were very critical for me and sort of my development and my learning experience, and really drew me to really have an interest in learning a little bit more about the world beyond the borders of the United States. So for all the folks, the faculty and staff and the partners and the practitioners who made this happen, I want to say thank you so much. So as Professor Prasad mentioned, I've been at the department for about 7 months now to the week, and I've been absolutely floored by the commitment that I've seen over and over by the community of practitioners and teachers and the student leaders and the partners and the alumni who continually come out each and every day to help make sure that our young people have a global education experience. This is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, and I firmly believe that it's critical for the development of our workforce, which increasingly has to be more globally competent and more globally literate each and every day. So you could, in essence, say that I'm the chief evangelist at the Department of Education for global education, and I make sure that my colleagues hear about this each and every day. I harass everybody in the department to make sure that they're thinking globally about everything they do. So I don't have any black eyes yet. I still have all my teeth. No one's punched me. But I will continue to harass them and make sure that everyone is infusing global learning in what they do in that global perspective. I'm sure that for many of you all who are students at the Smith School and those of you who are alumni, you will remember from your strategy class that it is important to constantly survey the competitive landscape ahead of you. It's critical to understand the shifts, the changes, the trends, and potentially the disruptions that are on the horizon. Well, for those of you who are students in this room, here's what the landscape looks like ahead of you. You are hopefully graduating into a world, hopefully graduating soon, but you are graduating into a world where 95% of the world's consumers are outside of U.S. borders. And 75% of the world's population does not speak English, despite it being lingua franca in the business world. And increasingly in this country, 1 in 5 jobs is tied to global trade, and we expect that number will continue to rise. You're obviously in the International Trade Center. Our colleagues who work in this building each and every day do their best to increase that number and increase the amount of exports that our companies push out each and every day. So it's critical to our national security and our nation's priorities, and increasing, again, we will see more and more jobs tied to international trade. I understand that the theme, as Professor Prasad had mentioned earlier, the theme of today's Emerging Markets Forum is around entrepreneurship, and never has the subject of entrepreneurship taken a more central role to our competitiveness as a country, to our national security, and to our shared prosperity as a global community. For those of you thinking about entrepreneurship, it's almost a given. If you're thinking about it as a career path, or you're aspiring to pursue this endeavor, it's increasingly important that you think about it in a global context. Doing business in emerging markets there's a huge upside. That's probably why so many of you are interested in it. But I'm sure so many of you recognize that doing business in emerging markets is also full of risks and barriers and obstacles. And navigating both the rewards and those barriers requires an interdisciplinary and an increasingly global perspective. You've got to be globally literate to be able to capitalize on it and to also be able to navigate the roadblocks and the hurdles ahead of you. So there may be significant political and security risks that you all encounter as you take your enterprises, your budding enterprises, your baby, as you take your businesses overseas. Increasingly, you have to navigate things like political and security risk. And this isn't just a function of finance or accounting or what you learned in your strategy class. You need to understand the world area that you're doing business in. And you need to understand how that part of the world connects with another part of the world. So you will likely need to understand how the production of oil in Saudi Arabia affects the consumer in Moscow. How does it affect those young people on the street? How does it affect their job prospects? How does it affect their local economy? For those of you who may be thinking about the next new health product, you may need to consider that bowl of quinoa that you pick up at Whole Foods at the hot bar, and how the price of that commodity affects the farmers down in Peru. So again, those interconnections are increasingly important, and while you're in the classroom, focus on developing those linkages and understanding how connected the world is, and how some say, the butterfly effect takes place, that one thing over here is going to affect something over here, even though the connection may not be immediately visible. When doing business in other markets, their standards around intellectual property protection may be different than our own, and often they are. And if you don't speak the language in that country, I certainly hope to God your lawyers do. And if your lawyers don't, I would suggest maybe getting another lawyer. But I'm also thankful that some of our colleagues at the Department of Commerce here in this building, and some of our colleagues down at the Department of Justice, so many of those professionals are fluent in other languages. They're multilingual. And that's important for the success of our businesses and the protection of our ideas and our products. I can envision situations where you, as entrepreneurs, are overseas and you're negotiating a deal to get your product into that new and exciting market. You know it's just going to take off. But you may not be sure how to read someone's body language because maybe somebody says yes, but your gut tells you it doesn't entirely mean yes. Or someone says in Arabic, inshallah, God willing, but you're not entirely sure what that means for the success of your product in that particular market. But hopefully, while you were a student at the University of Maryland, you had the opportunity to study abroad. And while you were in the market that week before you went home and you were buying that little trinket for your mom because she told you to bring her something back from the marketplace, hopefully you had an interaction with a shopkeeper in which you had to negotiate the price. And in that exercise, you learned to understand ambiguity just a little bit. You learned to understand cultural nuances just a little bit more. And you learned how to be comfortable in a situation where those nonverbal cues weren't entirely clear as to what they meant. You gained the tools, hopefully in that interaction, to operate with flexibility and with a little bit more global competence. And that's why it's so important for our students, whether they're enrolled in engineering or business or public health, to have these experiences, whether they're on campus, whether they are overseas. It's important that they have this tool set that we call global literacy or global competency. I always tell folks I'm not particularly fussed whether that takes the shape of world language learning, so you can decipher what other folks are saying, whether it's studying a particular curriculum in a global context, whether it's studying a particular part of the world, or whether it's having an experience abroad. Each of them bring a certain set of skills that is increasingly critical to our success as we think about business in markets overseas. So we live in an era where a small website designed in a dorm room in a college campus in Cambridge can change the way the world communicates and socializes. So just ask Mark Zuckerberg and his 1.3 billion friends that he has on Facebook, most of whom, I'd like to remind you, are outside of U.S. borders. And each and every day, his team running that small website has to be globally competent and globally literate. They have to think about their users, and they have to think about their users in each and every country, in each and every demographic. That's critical for their success. So entrepreneurship has the power to transform societies. You all know that, and hopefully that's why you're here. In fact, President Obama has recently announced that we will be hosting the Global Entrepreneurship Summit this coming July in Nairobi. We're very excited about it. The Department of Education is playing a role in hosting some discussions, hopefully around the role that universities can play in global entrepreneurship. The summit will attract young people, primarily from sub-Saharan Africa, but also from many Muslim-majority countries and countries around the world. And entrepreneurship can really provide an alternative for so many young people to some of the madness that we've seen in the world. It can give hope and inspire, and also bring some fascinating products and ideas and services to the marketplace to solve some of the challenges that we've had for years and years and years. Entrepreneurship has the power to elevate folks out of poverty and to change the way a village or a town or a city or a country looks. It's a very, very powerful idea. And I want to emphasize again that it's just not enough for us to approach entrepreneurship in a linear perspective, with a one-dimensional perspective. We've got to be well-rounded. This is like watching black and white TV. Nobody wants to do that. But having that global perspective adds that high definition. That's critical. And I often emphasize to my colleagues, I emphasize to my grantees, for those of you who are responsible in this room for educating our young people, it's simply not enough, excuse me, for an engineer out of Stanford or an MIT, or in this case, the University of Maryland. It's not enough for an engineer just to be dropped in a village outside of Cairo with the charge to build a bridge, because their job is infinitely more difficult if they don't understand the language or the cultural context in which they operate. It's not enough for a young business major to be dropped off in Shanghai or Dubai or some of the financial capitals in the world with just a background in finance. That's simply not enough in the world that we live in. And as we think about some of the big thematic, the big issues of our day, climate change, how do we solve climate change if we don't have an understanding of consumer behavior in China or industrialization in Indonesia or deforestation in Brazil? It's critical that we've got these skills and these perspectives. How do we tackle a disease like Ebola if we don't speak the language that's spoken in a village in rural Liberia? How do we address the movement of a disease like Middle East respiratory syndrome if we don't understand how the Hajj pilgrimage plays into the way people migrate and move around the world? So it's critical to have these global perspectives as we tackle the challenges of tomorrow, and this applies to business and entrepreneurship. So for you as budding entrepreneurs, you're going to have to hire people, especially as you're thinking global. You're going to have to hire people who are going to work across the globe, and those people, you're going to have to understand the cities and the countries that they live in. You're going to have to understand the holidays in those countries and in those cities. You're going to have to understand the customs of the people who live in those cities. You're going to have to understand the languages that are spoken there. You're going to have to understand the climate and how that climate affects business. You're going to have to understand the politics in those particular cities in a very nuanced way. And you're going to have to understand how consumers behave in those particular markets, because it may be very different than how consumers behave here in the Washington, D.C. area. And even if you're going to keep your business local, even if you're going to hire for a workforce here at home, you're still hiring from a much more diverse workforce than ever before. And you're hiring from a workforce where English may not be the first language of many of the folks in your talent pool. And that workforce is likely to originate from every corner of the globe. And they may participate in every faith tradition and celebrate different holidays and have different customs at home. And you as the boss or the partner, you got to get it. You've just got to get it. So, as I mentioned earlier, global competencies are not just a nice to have. They're an essential. They're an essential for your success. They are an essential for the success of our country. They're critical in the world that we live in. So for those of you who would like to keep in touch with me, with my team, we continue to push out information on these particular topics. You can follow me on Twitter at GoGlobalEd. That's my team's Twitter handle. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to interact with you. I know that time is tight this morning, but I really want to just close by saying thank you. Thank you to the students in the room for engaging in this topic. Thank you for thinking about entrepreneurship, because that's what powers our economy. That's the backbone of our economy is entrepreneurs. And as you think about global markets, you're really on the front lines. That's really cutting edge, and it's a great way to wave the American flag overseas. Entrepreneurship is one of the values that is often described by folks overseas as one of the things that they really love and respect about this country. So if there's a flag to wave, it's the one tied to entrepreneurship. I want to thank again the teachers in the room who day in and day out keep their students focused on the things they need to be focused on. And for the partners in the room, thank you for your philanthropy. Thank you for your mentorship and your guidance, and thank you for playing a role. It's critical that this is a community effort. So I just want to say thank you again for your time. I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to share my thoughts with you. Have a good day.